Hi everybody and welcome to my channel. My name is Crystal Bay and today I'm surprised that I haven't done this video yet, but today we are gonna do a testimony video. If at all any of what I went through in my journey to relationship with Christ is helpful for somebody, then I am more than happy to share that. I definitely grew up knowing Christ. I grew up in the church. I didn't always understand everything about Christianity and about the Bible, but I think that something that really helped me was just reading the stories that are in the Bible. So I remember at a young age, I started reading just like certain stories in Genesis and just early in the Old Testament on my own when I was in church and like didn't understand things. I enjoyed doing that. I got baptized pretty early because it was something that I really wanted to do. I got baptized at about 7. When I was younger, around age 6, I would have these dreams and visions. And I would have dreams and visions about people and about events and about things that were gonna happen, and they did happen. And so it was something that I just told my parents about. I didn't really broadcast it to anybody because it was something that I felt was very special to me. And at a young age, I started just like having conversations with God and like prayer, and just different things started to be revealed to me. Around that same time, maybe a few years later, around 7 or 8, my parents got divorced. And that, combined with just the tumultuous domestic environment that I was already living in, created a lot of trauma for me. Like with all forms of trauma, it is the enemy's intention to use those things to shape you in a way that distances you from God. And so that's kind of what happened. I didn't fully realize the effects of it until maybe years later when I hit my early preteens. I carried a lot of that stuff on the inside of me. I remember I was just like sad and, you know, angry and confused. And then while I was trying to work through that, one of the most stable people in my life got sick. And that was my granny, and she got sick with cancer and she ended up passing away. And so that only like added to my emotional trauma and just like the amalgamation of everything that I was dealing with before and during, like at school with my school life and just different things that were happening to me at school. I just fell into a deep, deep depression at a very young age, maybe around 12 or 13 at this point. Like, I was severely depressed. I would have these like dark intrusive thoughts, and just during that time I began self-harming, and I went back to therapy. I requested to go back to therapy because I was going through such a hard time with dealing with everything and not having the best coping mechanisms. And then the therapist that I went back to told me that I was fine. And I told him that I wasn't. And so it was sort of that thing of like being so deep in it and crying out for help and not being heard. I'm also someone who like holds it all together pretty well because I've had to be that person in my family. And so when I was in that deep, deep state of depression, I don't think people really believed me or believed how serious it was. And so even my therapist sort of dismissed me. And so that made me spiral even worse. Looking back on it now, I can see that the enemy was really trying to get me in a space of isolation. He was trying to distort my mind. I was in a place where I had terrible, terrible, terrible self-esteem, and that lasted for years afterward. So he was like trying to distort my view of myself. He was trying to, I mean, obviously I was self-harming, so that was, looking back on it now, that was a demonic influence, because when you are filled with the Holy Spirit, you don't want to hurt yourself, you know? When you're in the thick of it and you're a kid who's, you know, just like experiencing hormones for the first time, like a very young kid, it's a very scary thing, and it feels like you'll never come out of it. But by the grace of God, God was still with me. He still protected me. If you're going through that, I just want you to know that you will come out of it. There is a way out. God is still with you. He's protecting you whether you see it or not. And at the end of the day, you are going to be okay. Fast forward to high school, maybe 14, 15, I was still grieving, and I was still going through some of this same stuff. Thankfully, I had quit the self-harming by the time that I got into high school, by the grace of God. But I was still going through just a lot of emotional turmoil, a lot of unrest, still struggling with depression. And then on top of that, I began to develop anxiety in my high school. And at that point, I started really wrestling with my values. Like, what do I even believe at this point? Like, I never really questioned the existence of God, but all of the things that I had grown up with the knowledge of, like about his character and about his commandments for us as human beings in order to live a good and prosperous life, and the things that he wanted us to do and the path that he wanted us to take in order to be close to him and in order to just be happy and healthy, I started to question a lot of those things, and to question, you know, if I really believed them or not, or, you know, just if what he said about me was true. And in that process, it led me to make a lot of bad decisions. Started having premarital sex with this guy who I later married, thank God. But basically all of that happened because I had such a low through the basement self-worth and self-esteem. And I just, like, with the self-harming thing, I wasn't doing that anymore physically, but I made a lot of self-sabotaging decisions and did things that I had no business doing because that's what I thought that I deserved. That's what I thought that I was worthy of. And the person that I was so going through it, and it was like nobody saw me. Like I didn't feel seen. I was at a very high functioning state of anxiety and depression because I sort of just had to be in order to survive my life at the time. And this is in no way to say that I just had like such a bad experience, because it really wasn't that. It was just a lot of mental and emotional attack, and the enemy trying to warp my self-perception and my thought process and my view of God and just make me into a miserable person. And I'm really just giving the abridged version because there's just like a lot of stuff that happens. God has just been there so heavily ever since the beginning. I know that it was Jesus. It wasn't anybody else. And I just knew that I wanted to turn my life around, because like I said, from 6 to whatever age was a long time to be dealing with severe depression and anxiety and self-harming behaviors and self-sabotage and low self-esteem and body image and just like all of those things. And I had enough. I wanted to turn my life around. And I remember the first place I started was with prayer. I didn't really necessarily know how to pray. if I'm being honest. And I was like, I can't live like this anymore. I want to learn how to pray. I just gotta go back to my roots. And so I started with prayer, and I was very intentional about it, and I noticed breakthrough. And at the end of high school, I was finally able to crawl out of grief. I was finally free from an environment that facilitated my anxiety at such high levels. I was finally able to get rid of my depression. I was finally beginning the work on my feelings of low self-esteem and unworthiness. I had a great community of friends that sort of helped me come out of that isolation thing. And honestly, guys, it was all God. It was all prayer. It was all prayer, and those were all answered prayers. So I'm gonna end part 1 there, because that's sort of like the whole backstory and the groundwork for what we're working with. And then in part 2, I'm gonna talk about actually how I began to walk in relationship with God to where I am today. Yay! Okay, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe, and stay tuned for part 2, because in part 2 is where it gets good. Leave prayer requests in the comments below, because I'll definitely be praying for you guys if any of my story resonated a little bit with you. All right, guys. Bye.